Midnight on Earth podcast with your host, Jake Weaver. Engineered by Cedric Swan.
Hey everybody, we are back. Another episode of Midnight on Earth. I'm your host, Jake Weaver, and we are here to bring you more knowledge, more lights, and more love. As usual, look, people, I work so hard to bring you the best guests. The best people are out there. They want to share this information. We have another human here that wants to talk about UFOs. We're going to talk about this with Keith Thompson. He is here. He is the author of a recently released book, The UFO Paradox, the celestial and symbolic world of unidentified aerial phenomenon. And he has a lot of thoughts on the matter, and we're going to talk to him in just a second. But first, I have to read the bio, so here we go. Keith Thompson is an author, independent journalist, talk radio host, former TV talk show host, and former U.S. Senate staff member. His articles have appeared in the New York Times, Esquire, San Francisco Chronicle, Idaho Statesman, and the Pacific Sun. He lives currently in Northern Florida, and he's here with us today. Hello, Keith.
Jake, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I love your book. I love what you're putting out there. You're challenging the status quo now into something that's very mysterious and opening people's eyes to other ways to look at this, changing people's perception. Incredible. Thank you for being here.
Well, and I think I've been told I'm challenging the status quo even within the UFO field.
Exactly.
And I'm on the same side. First of all, bottom line question, are UFOs real? UFOs are real. The phenomenon is real.
Oh yeah, we're past that.
That's grade level. But even then, that's a good question to keep coming back to, because I often say, I'm okay with saying, I don't know a particular answer to a question, because when I can say I don't know, I open space for possibly learning something new.
Right.
So there's a lot in the field that I have sort of gently tweaked, some of the work on abductions and so forth, but it's in the spirit of let's get at this in the biggest way possible. Let's expand. So that's my purpose.
Yes, exactly. Because again, like you're saying, it's very basic now in 2024 on Earth. Yes, there's life out in the universe. Really? It's like, it seems almost improbable for there not to be, but somehow people still hang on to that notion that we're just like alone here. I don't know why. There's something psychological going on.
It's something psychological and something physical. And it spans the gap between those two in a way that, according to our materialist, physicalist worldview, these are supposed to be separate categories. We've got the material world over here and the psychic world, and they're not supposed to meet. I'm saying they not only meet, but they dance and they make love. Yes. And sometimes they get really funky.
And some people just live in denial that they really feel like this is it. The planet Earth, they don't even call it a dimension, but just this place of matter. That's it. And there's no other life out there. They still kind of hang on to that, which is really strange. But overall, we're past that. Like, we know there's something else out there.
Well, when I was working on the book, when I was writing it, I actually wrote it with a different title. And it's not often understood by readers that the title that the book ends up with is not necessarily the title that the writer started out with. But it was interestingly, even though I changed the title, it allowed me to write the book that is now titled The UFO Paradox. My original title was A Call from the Cosmos. And the idea being the UFO, it finally hit me one day. This phenomenon, the UFO is a calling from the cosmos, metaphorically speaking, for humans to play a bigger game.
Yes.
It is as if the UFO is saying, there's more out here, folks. There's more to reality. Not new to reality, but new to you, because you've limited your worldview. So there's more to what is than what you say is, and we're here to kind of pop your bubble. So A Call from the Cosmos as a title would have sort of hidden this material a little too much. So we settled on the term, the UFO paradox, and I'm happy with it because there is not a single UFO paradox. There are many paradoxes. There are many. A is true. B is also true. But wait, aren't A and B contradictory? Yes. And they're both true.
Right. Exactly. There's so many different layers to reality and layers to the experience, because we really are, like you said, in a limited bandwidth of perception. And there is so much life. There's so much energy out there. You think about just how much life is on this planet in a material sense that we can visually see and interact with. Microorganisms, smaller creatures, ocean creatures, land creatures, just incredible amount of variation of life. And now you make that like a microcosm and a macrocosm. That's how much life is out there. There's just as much variation of life here as is out there. And they're showing up in a lot of different ways, I believe.
And the question is often asked in the UFO field, are we alone? And my response is, no, we're not alone, but we've never not been alone. It's our current worldview. I sometimes will say, the problem is we stopped teaching Dante, D-A-N-T-E. Who is Dante? He was a philosopher, theologian in the Middle Ages who had a view of the universe. If you look up Dante on Google, you'll find his maps, his cosmology of the universe with multiple levels and layers of being. The great worldviews, the great cosmologies of antiquity and the Middle Ages presumed that we live in a highly animated world. We've reduced it to, well, if it's not here, it must be from outer space. Again, that's a very narrow frame. By the way, some aspects of what are called UFOs may indeed be intergalactic. They may match up very well with Steven Spielberg. But Spielberg made that movie. We could talk about this at some point. He worked closely with Jacques Vallée, the French astrophysicist, astronomer, who is really one of the best minds in this field. He worked with Vallée, and he understood the phenomenon is far more complex than a mere extraterrestrial frame. But Spielberg said to Vallée, Jacques, I work in Hollywood. My job is to make a movie that could be understood and will be grasped by the average person. The ET hypothesis is very compelling. And Vallée said, well, you're right. It is. It's not the whole story. And even Spielberg said, no, it's not the whole story, but we can't get too far out. So just to kind of tell you, a lot of the themes in Close Encounter, by the way, are very accurate. For example, let's talk about that. Remember when Richard Dreyfuss is getting increasingly, quote, crazy?
Yeah,
his marriage is falling apart.
Sculpture and everything.
Oh, yeah. He opens the living room or the dining room window, and he brings mud in the house, puts it on the dining room table. He's building a map of Devil's Tower in Wyoming. Or is it Montana? I forget which.
It's in Wyoming. Yes, Devil Tower. Wyoming.
Well, this isn't working out really well for his wife, Terry Garr, and their kids. In fact, the kids are convinced Dad is going crazy. Well, guess what? Richard Dreyfuss is not alone. All around the world, people are constructing facsimiles of Devil's Tower. Something is out there in the collective psyche. I give Spielberg real credit for conveying the field effect that very often happens, which is, by the way, it's not supposed to be able to happen. So we're supposed to consider Richard Dreyfuss and all the other people individually crazy. We can't have a collective frame in which they're on to something bigger than our frameworks allow us to talk about.
It's really interesting. And that movie is amazing. Of course, there's so many themes in that movie, but like you're saying, there's something going on with these crafts, ships, lights, whatever they are. And they're, again, telling us, saying, hey, we're out here, advance yourself, raise your vibration, come together as a species. Because I believe, and tell me what you think about this, I believe that if you're an advanced conscious species and you raise your vibration, you're doing really well, your whole reality is based on love and, companionship and just that experience, inspiration changes. You get deeper inspiration and you get access to higher forms of technology, because all of those things, all of those types of technology have technically always existed in the ethereal sense, in the Akashic sense, So it takes raising your vibration, getting to another state of being, a love-based state, to get that technology. What do you think about that?
It's a very good point. In fact, the question, are they the beings that people interact with, for example, in the alien abductions? These are not gentle visits in many cases. The question is, what about them is not gentle? Well, are they intrinsically malevolent? Are they intrinsically ominous? Or are they perceived as malevolent and ominous from the limited point of view that we start with? For example, you're in your home at night, someone starts pounding on the door. Your first instinct is, I'm under attack. Right. It might very well be. There's a home invasion. And in today's media world, with what's happening in the breakdown of so much of our social life, that's a pretty reasonable, like, someone's trying to break into my house. Turns out it's somebody who's trying to either escape being attacked, or his car has broken down, her car has broken down. They need help. So the perception of there are beings that appear to be intruders. That's the name of a book by Bud Hopkins, one of the early books about the abduction phenomena. Are they intruders truly? Meaning, we don't know. But in some sense, I argue that the sense in which they are coming at us and appear to be negative may well be our own defense mechanism to opening up larger. Well, give me one more figure of speech.
Yeah.
You've done therapy in a relationship. You've done relationship therapy. If you're married and you've been married long term, you probably have had some degree of counseling. If not, lucky you. But there's nothing wrong with counseling. And very often in therapy, there will be a confusion. He will say to his wife, "You were really intending to be harmful to me in what you did. And you need to own it. That was wrong. And I'm still traumatized, blah, blah, blah." And a good therapist will listen carefully, and he'll pick up the discrepancy, he or she, but I'll just say he. Therapist will say, "Sounds like you're thinking your husband intended to hurt you. What I hear is that it had the impact of hurting you. You're adding the assumption that it was intentional. Now, it might have been intentional harm, but it impacted you in a harmful way." So the difference between intent and impact is very important to bear in mind in these abductions. Are they intended to harm us, or is the impact one of harm to our current identity? Is it trying to get us to grow?
Wow. Yes, I think so. I think that that's really the issue. It's fear, because it's such a different frequency. It's such a different energy. And as humans on Earth, we're interacting with all of these types of consciousnesses pretty regularly, plants and animals, and we're kind of vibing out with our pets. But then there's this other frequency that's so radically and shockingly different. It's unlike anything. It's actually not like anything that's from your planet. And whoa, the fear, the fight or flight, it just kicks on. And as you know, that puts you into lower brain function, where you're not thinking in that way that's abstract, that's intelligent. You're like, how do I get out of here? How do I survive? It almost takes training and multiple interactions with these type of entities before you can engage with it in a way that's like friendly and not fearful. What do you think?
Oh, I absolutely agree. In fact, I have speculated in the book, as a matter of fact, I speculate, what if since abductions are, the reports are that they are often happen many times in a lifetime, for whatever reason, keep coming back, interacting with the human. Sometimes there's a family basis, a generational. I'm very open to that evidence. Could it be that this impact is the repeated impacts are such that, what if we would start working? This is just totally blue sky here, speculation. What if abductees would get training in working with their emotional body, their subtle body, their astral body? Now, that's assuming, and that's a larger conversation. I believe this is only the gross body. It's
Right.
the one that's the one that gets us around in 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. Materialist science says this is the only body. But the great philosophies of antiquity have held that we are multi-leveled in our embodiment. We have subtle bodies. Well, to what extent is when we have a very sharp divide between it's either happening physically or it's psychological? Well, of course, the debunkers say, therefore, it's not happening physically. People are not being abducted. Therefore, they debunk it entirely. I'm actually arguing, wait a minute. A large part of the abduction or the contact experience could be happening at subtle levels of our own being that are subliminal to us that we have lost track of. Did anybody in grade school said, now we're going to have an hour of rest for our subtle bodies to rejuvenate? No, because we don't believe that. But in antiquity, there were mystery ceremonies. There were mystery initiations whereby people who were seekers would go through extraordinary experiences and learn to expand their consciousness, learn to expand their sense of being. So I often say we may have forgotten about the aliens, what we call alien, but it has not forgotten about us. It's coming. I see the UFO as a return of something that we've forgotten about. I just put that idea. What could be returning? I'm suggesting that it's our own larger being toward which we have been in amnesia.
Wow. So you're implying that it could be other humanoids, part of our human family, a different stage of development, a previous world. They left, they're more advanced, they want a different type of human to evolve here and get to that same point?
I would say so. And let me make it clear, I'm not being Pollyanna here. As we say in political language, no is a complete sentence. We all have learned in the past 20 years about setting boundaries in our relationships. Okay, no is a complete sentence. I don't owe you a reason why I'm saying no. No. Well, if an individual who is in touch with his or her getting more in touch, can say to an alien that is not friendly, no. Right. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that a dark force will turn around and go. But I'm thinking at the moment of and we could sort of shift gears just a little bit, but I want to bring it back. The research on psychedelics. Yes. The legitimate research on psychedelic therapy that Dr. Stanislav Grof played a huge role in.
Yes, of course. We cover that quite a bit.
Well, okay. Well, good. Well, then your audience is hip. I had the pleasure, and I have the pleasure of being an acquaintance and, in fact, a friend of Stan Grof. Wow. Haven't seen him for a while, but we have some great stories together. And he once told me, he has a marvelous Czechoslovakian deep voice. And he said, Keith, whether you're doing a psychedelic voyage or simply in a dream, if you're being chased down by a dark, malevolent, ogreish force, if you run, it will chase you. If you turn and stare at it and said, what's the deal? You'll find, and I won't keep doing his voice, but he said, you'll find that it very likely will melt down into elements of energy and material that you don't even know, but being willing to face down your demons. Isn't that a powerful metaphor? Most of us accept if you don't stare down your demons, they'll continue to haunt you. We accept that as a truism. Well, I'm suggesting that could very well be the case with UFO abductions. And the point is to be experimental. I'm completely sympathetic to abductees. I'm not an abductee myself. I have not had the experience of having something come through the walls of my house, and this is what is reported, lifting me out of my bed into what appears to be a craft and conducting medical examination. You'll know that, as you know, in my book, I cover the Pascagoula case. It was my favorite case. It's the closing chapter. Maybe we'll chat about that. But in any case, I've got to know abductees. And I have, while I'm not a licensed therapist by any means, I have taken on a role of counseling them from this kind of perspective to empower them. I'm kind of sometimes I find myself coaching these individuals to help them stand up for their full being. And again, to say no, but also, Dr. John Mack of Harvard, who was a leading abduction researcher, he tended to find himself interacting with abductees who reported that their initially troubling experiences, the interactions, the abductions, were actually transformative. So again, that's the thing Groff was saying. Look at your demon and it will transform into what it really is. And that might be your next level of your own being.
Wow. Yes, exactly. That's the thing. There's some reason there's an interface and an engagement going on. It's part of your or that person's personal development, like their spiritual development. But what about, since you brought up psychedelics, what about the DMT that's in our brain? Now, I've heard Ken Ring talk about how the abduction phenomena may be linked to the fact that as we go into the dream state, our brain releases DMT. And through studies with DMT, people have been found to consistently interact with the same beings. They go back, there's different people, they have these DMT trips, they interact with these beings. So when you're in your dream states, that's the biological interface point that allows a dimensional shift to happen for consciousness itself to either go into their dimension or the two dimensions merge for a abduction experience to happen, though perhaps based on that, the abduction experience is happening in a different dimension.
Absolutely. And then there's an overlap of dimensions sometime. Right. I think the psychedelic literature, which is complex, it's no single body, but it is, just imagine in a Venn diagram, with overlapping circles, just take all the psychedelic research, and that includes the modern LSD research, Terence McKenna's mushroom research, the ayahuasca research, the DMT research, just call that all psychedelic. There'll be lots of subdivisions, lots of corridors in that room. Call that the psychedelic. Overlap, then create the circle of the UFO phenomenon, the saucer frame of reference. The near-death experience is another circle that overlaps. And then finally, not only, but one more circle is shamanism. Oh, the shamanic encounters, which, so I a lot of people listen to me in the mainstream UFO world. They get frustrated. You are expanding this so broadly that it makes it hard for us to know where to stand. Well, Joseph Campbell, the great mythologist, who if you've never heard, Jake, and I know you have, if you've not,
I have,
to any of your listeners or viewers who haven't heard Joseph Campbell, get on Google, look for his marvelous interviews with Bill Moyers. I had another opportunity to know Joe Campbell pretty well too, and I took workshops with him.
You would be the third person, before you get into that, I just want to say really quick, you would be the third guest on the show that had interactions with Joseph Campbell, including Wendy Weir, who brought Joseph Campbell to a Grateful Dead show. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Wendy, yes, the Weir, one of the Weirs is a Grateful Dead, right?
Bob Weir's sister, Wendy Weir.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I knew Joe Campbell. He had retired from Sarah Lawrence University. And this is not a guy who retires. He retired from that job, but he went on to his next work. And he was teaching seminars around the country, late 70s, in his own age. He was mid-70s, I think, and maybe 70 when he retired. And he taught the hero's journey, the rites of passage, the initiatory model that we could discuss because it's really important to my book. Yes. But I was I workshop with him at Esalen Institute in California. And one day at lunch, I said, Joe, are you familiar with the UFO evidence, the abductions? He goes, no, tell me. And so I sat down at lunch with him and some others, and everyone sort of gathered in. So I said, well, there are these interactions called abductions. And his face lit up. He said, I want you to save this till after lunch, till the afternoon meeting. I want to explore this with you because it sounds like you're onto something. So again, beautifully generous. And so I introduced the group in the afternoon to the stages of abduction. By the way, we all agreed, let's set aside the question of the reality. We're not here to debate whether that is real or not, any more than we are debating whether this myth from Babylonia or that myth from Egypt is real. Because what Campbell was interested in was he started studying mythology, right? Celtic myths, Egyptian myth, Babylonian, Western myths, Greek. And he had a moment of epiphany. He said, all the mythologies of the world are telling a common story about a hero who steps forth, often blunders forth into an unusual, paranormal, surreal world. So he said to me, Keith, what you're describing in these abductions fits this perfectly. He said, I'm not saying they're only mythic. I don't say myth is not real. I'm saying we need to include the abductions and the UFO encounters, about which I have not heard. So thank you very much for bringing, I'm going to now start studying this. So I had the experience of Joseph Campbell saying he's going to start reading books about UFOs because he was a lifelong learner.
Oh my goodness, you're the third person now. Stephen Eisenstadt studied with him as well. If you're familiar with him,
I do know Stephen. We haven't seen him for years, but we have a friendly encounter way back. So, and I love his new work on dreams. It's just beautiful.
Yes, he was a guest on the show talking about that. So, wow, Joseph Campbell. Let's just give thanks really quick to Joseph Campbell, who I like to describe as the Einstein of ethnology and spirituality. What a soul. Give thanks for Joseph Campbell. So tell me, though, about that DMT aspect, because we do release this biologically. I just want to get back to that a little bit. We do release this biologically at different points in our life: birth, death, dreaming, extreme trance states. You think about the sweat lodge. All of this triggers that biological DMT, which seems in studies to, again, be the interface point between us and this higher consciousness. And then sometimes these entities come through. I mean, is this really what's happening, or do you really feel like there's a true material situation happening? I mean, you think about Roswell and the crash wreckage. I mean, that's material.
Well, a good question. Let me first of all say I'm not an authority on the DMT stuff, so I will make clear that I'm not PhD level on it. But
it's fine.
I don't think the fact that DMT may be involved is a reductionistic argument.
No, not at all.
It's a correlate, in the same sense that we know, for example, in physicalist materialist science, the widespread view is that the brain creates consciousness. There's no evidence. There's no evidence that the brain creates the subjective experience of the taste of sweet, the red of rose, the bitterness of heartbreak. Subjective experience cannot be understood to arise out of dead matter, which is, by the way, what materialism is. It's based on the philosophy that we're nothing but inert matter. So what am I saying here?
But it just seems so like these people never had a spiritual experience in their life. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, well, the fun discussion now in consciousness studies is the so-called hard problem of consciousness. It's only a hard problem how dead matter somehow creates, as an emergent phenomenon, conscious experience, if you believe that consciousness does emerge in that way. It is probably the case that in humans and higher level organisms, the capacity to experience consciousness is greater. But there is nothing that is more immediately tangible as a primary factor of existence than the knowledge, I am.
Right.
I exist. This moment is. I mean, if you just pause for what's going on right now? If I just say, Jake, what's going on right now? And you're open to it, you will maybe spend 5 seconds in silence, which we're not supposed to do. We're not supposed to have too much dead time on the air, right? But we might allow ourselves to have 5 or 10 seconds of silence, maybe even 15. What's going on is presence, a sense of this is. Isness, I-S-N-E-S-S, isness, is, right? Now it sounds woo-woo, sounds new agey.
That's us.
But
that's just
the fact that we are, you wake up in the morning and say, I am. So it is the primary fact of existence, consciousness. So that's a long string. So the idea that DMT is involved, I think it may be involved in some stages of the near-death experience.
Absolutely.
So And by the way, if you do any kind of physical training, running, hiking, walking, weight training, and you do it for 20 minutes or 30 minutes, you're going to trigger something called endorphins.
Right.
What are endorphins? They're pleasure-giving signals. They're telling us, keep doing this. It's good to be physically fit because it's not just physically fit. It's mentally and emotionally and spiritually fit. By the same token, the fact that DMT accompanies and correlates with expanded awareness does not reduce the awareness to the DMT. It correlates with it. We're multidimensional, so part of us will be open to neurotransmitters and serotonin and dopamine and oxytocin. So, yeah, it's all part of, we are a complex amphibian that exists on multiple levels.
Well, absolutely. And also that compound, of course, is found all throughout nature. And really, I just kind of believe it does allow our consciousness. Well, I believe everything's consciousness, but our individual consciousness, that information can somehow ride on that opening that's caused by the chemical reaction, the biology. It's like a biological interdimensional portal. And I will just say this, I've been to several events in my life, music events, camping related music events where large amounts of DMT are consumed by people while they're listening to the music. And I've seen UFOs at these events almost every time. And it just literally leads me to believe that there's something going on, that frequency shift that happens when your consciousness goes into that state is somehow attractive to these beings that are so sensitive.
Well, this is where Carl Jung is so important.
Right.
The psychologist Carl Jung. Now, let me just summarize. Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud agreed that our ego consciousness that we think is the totality is not. It's what we present to the world as. I'm Keith, you're Jake, and we have our boundaries. You're there, I'm here. There's a unconscious. There's a lot of stuff that we're not aware of much at the time. Where Jung took it differently and eventually parted company with Freud, he said, Sigmund, there's a level to the unconscious that I'm calling the collective unconscious. And there's a vast amount in that is all of the memory of history, all the collective memory of human beings. And mythology is very much, the mythological frames are very much about this. So the reason I bring in Jung, he came up near the end of his life. He became increasingly mystical.
Yes.
After fighting it off. He tried to present as a Western scientist. And he said, I'm still going to call myself a scientific empiricist. I will play the science game, but I'm called to something larger. And his biggest insight was that the associations of similarity that we all are aware within our own psyches, you know, when you notice that at the psychic level, we're able to say, oh, my boss is an authoritarian, right? My boss at work is an authoritarian. And a good therapist, if you're working on that with a therapist, might say, what's that like? Who else was an authoritarian? Because the therapist will pick up that there's some real energy with this issue. Well, it turns out that the person whose boss is an authoritarian had a father who was relatively authoritarian. So the point is, we know that the psyche operates by similarity and recognition of similar patterns. Well, Jung's insight was, guess what? In the collective psyche of consciousness at large, similarity is also in play. So I'm going to go right back to what you said. At a concert, a music event where DMT is being explored, what gets constellated? Weird events in the sky, interactions with people based on synchronicity, telepathy, clairvoyance. So there is when we're willing to open, it doesn't surprise me that most debunkers never have, that's not entirely true, so seldom have larger experiences because they have such well-formulated defense mechanisms. They are like the bouncers of the metaphysical bar. They're saying, you can't come in, you can't come in, you can't come in. Well, at some point, the force is enough. And And I will give some credit to people who are largely debunkers. Every now and then one will come along and acknowledge an experience that he or she cannot rule out of question. That's when, I make a distinction between skepticism and debunkerism. I'm a skeptic. I ask questions. The biggest job of a skeptic is to question my own assumptions and to invite you to question your assumptions. But that's different from a debunker. The debunker is the guy who is like a barroom bouncer. He or she spent a lot of time policing the field of parapsychology, saying that couldn't have happened. You didn't run enough experimental trials. The alleged telepathic effect was not valid. So it's just a dismissal. And we see the debunker mentality in the UFO phenomena too. It didn't happen because it couldn't have happened. Right. That's not scientific thinking. That's the mentality of the Vatican officials who went to see Galileo, and they knocked on his door and said, "We hear you're telling people that the Earth orbits the sun." "Yes. Would you like to look through my telescope?" "No. Put that away. Stop telling people or we're going to put you in house arrest for the rest of your life." Well, he didn't stop telling people, and they put him in house arrest. Fortunately, it was fairly polite. And I think it was 1996. 1996, the Vatican came out and said, "Oh, as for the Galileo matter, like Emily Litella on Saturday Night Live, never mind. Never mind. We were wrong on that, but let's move on." No, let's not move on. Let's acknowledge those moments when, similarly, there was a time when the villagers around the 1700s were claiming that there were flaming rocks falling out of the sky. The learned men of the Academy, including Thomas Jefferson, snickered. No, there are no fiery rocks falling from the sky. And when they came to the fields to look at the evidence of fiery rock, they said, "Oh, you've scorched this rock with fire. This is a fraud." They were meteors. They weren't a new phenomenon. They were a newly discovered phenomenon. Right. So look, the evidence that we live in an unfolding, evolving universe is pretty darn clear. My argument is it includes the paranormal. It includes the events that we call UFOs. Whether they're from outer space or larger dimensions, it's a good question. It's a larger world we're being called to. We're being called to recall a greater reality. And that's the fundamental purpose of my work with this book, to remind people we live in a universe, a cosmos that's bigger than our maps have told us. And one of my truisms goes like this: when there is consistently reported evidence of territories that aren't on the current maps, the response to dismiss the territories, that'll take you only so far. At some point, somebody needs to raise their hand and say, "How about the maps? Have we checked the maps lately? Are the maps up to date?" Well, the Galileo Vatican example showed the maps weren't up to date. We thought the sun orbited the Earth. Right. It never orbited the Earth, but we thought it did. So we have new maps now. They no longer say dragons be out there. Remember, there used to be maps that Magellan and Columbus had. This is dragons out there. Sea serpents out there. Well, metaphorically speaking, yes, the unknown was out there. It could have been a sea serpent. So I'm all in favor of exploring.
Yes. And again, it's new information, the integration of new information. When new information presents itself, it's okay to remove the existing models, but the power of paradigms keeps people in place. It's those paradigms and fear of survival because something about their being locks into that paradigm. Perhaps they have a job, perhaps there's something like that keeps them in survival mode. So they don't want that new information to upset that. However, if they just had a little faith and trust the process, they of course would be totally fine. And I recently recorded live actually at the UFO Fest here in McMinnville, Oregon. And there were 30,000 people all focused on the UFO phenomenon. It's a long-running festival. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
I have.
Yeah, they have a big parade. There was floats, and I could not believe the amount of skeptics I talked to there. I interviewed a lot of people in the crowd, and a lot of them did not believe at all, but they were just there to have fun. It was really interesting. We're growing, like you said, we're evolving, and consciousness itself, our awareness, the information that we can process is evolving. And that has to include this new information. And isn't it so that even these extraterrestrials, even though they may not physically look like us, the commonality is that we're all light beings? Like, we're living light, they're living light, they're in a vehicle, a physical vehicle, we're in a physical vehicle, but truly we're just one universal family of living light. So we just have to figure out how to interface, how to communicate with them. And like you said, they may not look like us, but it's us calling us forward.
Well, that's a great line of thinking, Jake. In the Greek philosophy around the subtle body, there's a term for the body, okima, or okimata, Ochemata, okimata. It means vehicle. So this is the most gross vehicle. And then there are increasingly more subtle vehicles in the subtle body philosophy. So yeah, they arrived, I'm going to go out here and say this. They arrived in apparent craft that actually show up on radar and other physical sensors. This is a physical phenomenon. So is this. And there are subtle levels. I often say that the first approach to the UFO is generally, for most people, toward the idea that it is very likely a physical phenomenon. It appears to be a technology that if we got close enough to it, we could kick the tires. Jeff Kripal has 3 stages of UFO research. The first stage is you assume seems to be a form of technology. You could kick the tires, you could activate the gear if you got close enough, and pretty soon it's going to be developed and disclosed that it's extraterrestrial spacecraft like Spielberg and The Day the Earth Stood Still and the other great E.T. movie. So then he said, but then there's something that happens. Stage 2 kicks in. There's different evidence that doesn't fit that. It appears, for example, that these encounters have been happening not just since 1947, when Kenneth Arnold famously saw 9 flying saucers or objects that move like flying saucers. No, it appears that the human encounters go back to the fairy faith. They go back to shamanic cultures, that interactions with beings have the same underlying archetypes as the saucer would. So maybe in stage 2, it's all just a kind of mythology in the making. Then you shift over to that side. Then stage 3 comes, according to Jeff Kripal, great professor of religious studies and philosophy at Rice University. And Jeff said, then stage 3 comes. Then the weird stuff like the alleged implants in the bodies of abductees, the abductions, and the alleged hybrid babies that are created. That's a whole, oh my Lord.
I've had guests that have talked about this happening to them.
Okay, well, that's a huge, we could go there if we want. It can take us down a rabbit hole. There are so many rabbit holes. We could hop anywhere. We're bunnies and we could go anywhere. But so anyways, the third stage is when we realize this isn't going to be explained entirely objectively or entirely subjectively as psychology. It's not going to be explained totally by material science or by religion. These are 2 frames of reference that are not really adequate to a phenomenon that hasn't divided into those kind of territories. So it's that kind of framework that it's neither objective nor subjective, but both. Science alone can't deal with it, but neither can religion. That is discouraging to some who come to the field. That's not exactly good news, Mr. Thompson. For me, it is very good news because this is the way it is. I don't ask reality to conform to my beliefs. When I find a discrepancy, I don't always do this, but I'm certainly committed to the idea. When I find a discrepancy between the way the world is and the way my theories of the world would have the world be, I generally find that it's my theories that need the update. Reality is fine. Reality is just what it is. My stories about it are probably missing something. So, as the teacher in California, Byron Katie, often says, every time when I fight with reality always wins.
That's beautiful.
Or she says, reality wins, but only 100% of the time.
Exactly.
So to me, the challenge is expand your worldview, but at the same time, critical thinking is important. I am not just an expansion guy. There are explanations that are sometimes conventional. You know, a knock on the wall is not necessarily a poltergeist.
Right.
But if there are things moving through the room that don't appear to behave according to time and setting, so, you know, discernment. The great religious traditions have always spoken of the importance of discernment among spirits.
Oh,
Use
absolutely.
discernment.
No, exactly. You do critical think, but you do want to keep all of your beliefs. I always talk about this in a superposition where you leave a little bit of aperture open, maybe 5 to 10%. For any possible new information to come in and change that. Never go 100% in any direction, because that's not how life is. And I would like to highlight that in your book, you talk about how the UFO phenomena echoes familiar and timeless rites of passage that accompany essentially big changes to human culture, similar, like you were saying, to Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. So this is like an indicator of evolution, in a natural indicator of advancement for a conscious species of our type. It's totally natural in every way.
Well, and absolutely right on to that. And Campbell was very profound on this question of the 3 stages of rites of passage and initiation, which, by the way, you don't have to start at the cosmic level that we're talking about. Just think in ordinary human life. I use the example in the Aboriginal cultures, the indigenous cultures, a boy doesn't become a man by getting a driver's license. He doesn't become a man by eating his Wheaties. He becomes a man through specifically, what happens is the boys are raised by the mothers. The men are hunting and fishing and doing that kind of stuff. And the boys get to be age 10, 11, 12, 13. It's about time they be separated from mom. Not because mom hasn't done her job.
Right.
She's done it very well. Her work is largely over. And by the way, there's an analogy to the girls too. The girls need initiation. They need to learn the mores that are relevant to being feminine, to being a female. So anyway, the men come to the huts at night with the knowledge of the mothers. The mothers know it's going to be that night, but the boys don't know. And the mothers scream and cry because the men are all wearing mythological masks. They grab the boys and spirit them away, take them to the huts in the woods, and begin to teach them about the ancestors. So there's a separation from the prior state of being. You're a boy. You're now in a middle zone, which Campbell called the marginal zone. You're betwixt in between. You're no longer a boy. You're not yet a man. You're going through the training, the tradition, the joking, the revelry about who the ancestors were. My son, oh, and by the way, the boys don't know that these are actually their own fathers. It depends on the idea that they're not their fathers. These are the gods teaching them. And then finally, stage 3. Stage 3 is a return to society. And now the boys are men. So we all have analogies to this just in modern day life. If you're a single individual, male or female, and you date, then you meet the one, you get engaged. Okay, there's a beginning of a separation. You're no longer totally single. You are technically single, but you're in the middle range. You're dating and you're engaged and you're planning a life together. And then finally, after the marriage and through the process of hanging out on the margins, you've gone from being single to being a married individual. So the point is that these 3 stages, separation, living in the margins, betwixt and between, and return to society as a whole with new understandings and a new identity. Likewise, I'm arguing that these experiences involving UFOs and direct encounters, I think, are initiatory. They are a rite of passage. Individual encounters, but also collectively. I think our society now is going through an initiation. For example, we now officially acknowledge the reality of UFOs. We now call them UAP. They got an acronym update, acronym upgrade. So even the military said we don't want to call them UFOs anymore because of all the connotations. By the way, the reason UFOs had those connotations because the military disparaged them. The government lied. Let's just be very honest. We've not been told the truth.
Not at all.
About this. That doesn't mean that every claim about disclosure is true either. I don't automatically go that far either. There are a lot of myths, beliefs that are in the air right now about what the government is not disclosing. I tend to take a cautious attitude toward that, but I'm open. I'm not a disclosure expert. I'll put it that way. There are researchers who are. David Grush, the military official who has said that he's got information. We have recovered craft and recovered biologics.
Right.
Maybe we do. That's an empirical claim that can be tested empirically eventually by finding out where this stuff is and uncovering the cover-up. I'm all for that.
Well, it is time. I believe that initiation is happening because perhaps we have reached a stage of development where we can accept that, like our frequency is ready, like all of these visitations that, again, like you said, start before 1947, way before. If you really look at ancient history and talk about the mythology and trying to extract things from that, you could say it goes all the way back. So all of those interactions were prepping our collective consciousness for this new form of consciousness that we've never experienced before as humans, perhaps. Now, I could be totally wrong about this, but it seems like we are being prepared for something, that birth, that crack in the cosmic egg, as Joseph Pierce would say, that we're being prepared and groomed in a way to have that type of birth. What do you think about that?
I think there's something very much like that. And I'm open. I don't have the exact parameters, but I'm aware of the larger frame that you're describing, and it feels to me right. And people say, Keith, what is the UFO paradox? What is you call your book the UFO paradox? There are many levels of the paradox, but certainly one of the major paradoxes is this. It's the discrepancy between individuals in this country and around the world reporting encounters of this kind that are officially and technically absurd, ludicrous, people being lifted out of their cars and levitated into craft. So the official agents of culture say, no, that didn't happen. Thank you. Drive home safely and don't talk about this anymore. So there is the witnesses who report this. The official culture says, no, didn't happen. So what it does, up until now, it drives the experiences underground rather than giving us a framework to, imagine a sane approach of a species that was committed to learning as the primary thing. When people would report things like that, it wouldn't be assumed to be automatically true, but it wouldn't automatically be debunked either.
Right.
There would be a space in between that says, let us hold these and let us look further. But no, the reports are absurd, ludicrous, unbelievable, not possible. They get suppressed. Well, think of any other evidence of life that you know of where suppression is a good long-term strategy. Go to divorce. Go to divorce court every day in this country. Relationships break up all the time because things aren't dealt with at the international level right now. We could go, I'm not going to go deeply into what's going on in the world because it's not what we're here to talk about.
Yes,
but
there is disharmony for sure.
Have some pretty major hot wars going on right now because of the inability to, because of suppressing. So anyway, yes. I think on an ontological level, reality level, the near-death experience is fascinating because, among other things, isn't it interesting that it is through technology, the greater ability to resuscitate patients that the greater technology has been making possible for the last 20 or 30 years, that we have more experiences of near death coming online, people reporting phenomena, not just the celestial, the celestial scenario.
Right. They're going to other dimensions. They're meeting family members.
Which the hardcore skeptic, those are just, fantasy and so forth. But I know from my own experience, I had a near-death experience.
Exactly. I was just going to segue into that. You had your own NDE earlier in your life.
And when I was in my 20s, it was a near drowning off the coast of Hawaii when I was body surfing. And we were all out having fun in the waves. I knew nothing about riptides at that point. It's not the big waves coming from out there toward the beach that are necessarily the problem. They can throw you pretty far for a loop. It's the riptides that you don't see that are pulling you out so fast. So the combination, I found myself, here's what basically happened without telling the larger story. By the way, the near-death experience was unknown to me. I'm old enough that I predate the official public awareness of the near-death experience. Oprah had not made it famous yet. Dr. Bradshaw, Dr. Phil, Jerry Springer, they didn't have talk shows about, you claim to have died, but you came back and you talked with your ancestors. What was that like? That was not even in my mind. I went through all the stages of the near-death experience without knowing, including, here's the key. I saw my friend. I saw my body, the body of someone I knew to be Keith. The awareness of I was no longer the body. I saw the body, and I saw my friends on the beach. Keith, come, because they couldn't come in for me. It was really treacherous. I don't know how I survived physically, but I did. I heard my friend Mary on the coastline shore say, in about the same level of volume of her voice, to our mutual friend Moore. She said, I told him not to go out. I told him it was too dangerous. Why didn't he listen? She was anguished. She was angry. And she was speaking at about this level. Trust me, I was over 100 yards. My body was over. So my body didn't cognize that. My body did not hear that. This was, in fact, I said to her, I said, when I say I said, as this field of awareness that I had become aware of being, I said, I'm okay. Not only because I believed I was dead, I experienced that I had already left. And not only was it okay, sorry about the funeral and you've lost your friend Keith, but Keith is actually fine. Keith was just an idea anyway. Keith is getting absorbed into mind at large. Then, bingo, I'm back in my body. They pull me out of the water. And one of my friends says to me, my friend Moore said, man, we thought we'd lost you out there. We thought you'd given it up. And I go, oh, good. I said, I did. I had given it up. And he goes, what do you mean? I said, I died and I'm back. And I could hear myself. And I said, this isn't going to go, this is not going to play in Peoria because they're not going to believe this. I don't fully believe it. And they looked at me like I was delirious. And that's when I realized, right in the book, there's a poem by the German poet Goethe, tell a wise person or else keep silent, because the mass man will mock it right away. I learned early in the wake of my near-death experience, which was not possible because the stages of near-death experience were not known, that talking about dying and coming back was not a good strategy to make friends at a party. You don't have this. And the abductees and contactees in the UFO world, I very much identify with them because they likewise they pay a big price socially for describing their experiences. So a big part of my book is really to provide support and grounding for people. My philosophy, Jake, is this. If you have an extraordinary experience of near death or an encounter or a paranormal experience that really rocks your world, tell somebody. Don't tell everybody.
Right.
Don't hold a news conference. Don't necessarily write a book unless you've got like Whitley Strieber the famous abductee,
Yes, communion.
who's a friend, and I admire him very much. He's taken a very brave path by being, by confessing his own experience as fundamentally as he has. He's paid a big price in his career for that. So I tell people, tell somebody, your clergy, your family, somebody that you love who will not call you, who will not disparage you. Get it. Don't hold it yourself, but don't show the whole world either. Find an intermediate realm for that.
Yes, and I think that people are open to it now more than ever. And you think about just the guests that I've had on the show. I've had several NDE survivors on this show talking about their experiences myself. And it's super powerful to know what's going on after the fact. I recently had a friend, a long-term sponsor of the show, pass away, and I was there. He had an NDE just a few days before he passed, and he told me about it. It's really powerful to know that you continue on after this, and that is a huge part of it, because your book is not only this really cool history of the UFO phenomenon and the different things around it and your thoughts, it's also a really good guidebook of a lot of spiritual things, the nature of reality, and how humans process experience itself. It's really, really powerful in that way. And I just want to back up a little bit, because we talked about how 1947 was this huge year for UFOs. Kenneth Arnold, of course, saw the saucers. He's the one that created the term flying saucers. There was the Roswell incident, 1947. But there were also, prior to that, some U.S. government rocket tests in Roswell, New Mexico. Some of the very first rocket tests were happening out there. And tell me what you think about this, and if you've ever heard of this before. Supposedly, Aleister Crowley, the occultist, in his final year, which he passed in 1947, he supposedly did some big magical ritual to call in these entities and opened a portal that allowed what we call the Greys and other entities to come into this dimension. What do you think about that? And have you ever heard that before?
I have heard of that, and it brings up a place for many of your listeners, if not themselves, and viewers, if not themselves, they have relatives and family whose framework for this is demonic, or it's angels. In other words, it's the angelic demonic frame of reference. I respect this.
It's a paradigm. No, it's a paradigm, but go ahead. It's
a paradigm and a set of lens for seeing it. So I don't dismiss any evidence, but you would say that just for the very reason that there are religious people, especially Christian religious and other fundamental religions, who would say, this phenomenon is not extraterrestrial, it's demonic, and we take great risks in attempting the occult. So by the way, I believe the occult is real. I'm not an expert on it, but and magic is real. And it's important to be, again, discerning of spirits. But as for Roswell, I'm aware of those claims. I'm certainly aware that my philosophy or my worldview, where consciousness is primary.
Yes.
That it is the ground of our being. It is the most fundamental datum of our existence, that we are and that we have knowledge of existing. Then a world of consciousness would be a world in which energies of various kinds can manifest. And I believe the collective activity of the kind that Aleister Crowley might have been talking about and might have been involved with could even result in materializations of phenomena that could crash. Look, I did not even recite the word Roswell once in this book, only because, I figured the Roswell literature is very highly developed at this point.
Yeah.
I decided not to go down that rabbit hole, only because there was nothing new I could add to it. But here's what I want to say to listeners who don't know. What about Roswell? Something crashed in Roswell. Something was the focus of a massive search and collection effort. The military is known to have gone door to door demanding, if you picked up any of that matter, you need to retrieve it, and do not hold. There were some threats. Now, What was it? I'm aware that the non-extraterrestrial view is that some kind of top secret craft of our own, or maybe something from Russia, got through, more likely our own. Now, I'm not saying, please understand, if there are hardcore Roswell people out there who've studied this deeply and they are convinced that the best case is not what I'm saying, fine. But at the same time, let's just put our models out there. The most likely alternative view is it's something of our own that we did not want to hide. Something that we were actually willing to claim in our first cover story was an extraterrestrial saucer. That's what the military announced. And then again, Emily Latella came the next day. Never mind.
Right.
It was just a weather balloon. Well, there's a huge gap in evidence between a weather balloon and what crashed in the desert out there. I don't know what crashed. I know there are claims of beings and deceased aliens. I don't know what to make of it. I mean, I don't have a final view. It doesn't keep me awake at night either.
No, there's so many crashes. I was just pointing that out because it happened in that same year, 1947. But there's been crashes that have been recorded throughout history. Ancient Japan talks about a crash where the humanoids ended up just living there and becoming part of Japanese culture. There's a crash that happened in the Old West. I can't remember the town off the top of my head, but they actually buried the alien in a local graveyard and reported on it in the local paper. So these crashes have been happening for a very long time. So it could possibly be humans even from the future. We just don't know, but we do know that the phenomenon is happening. Like there's something.
Oh yeah, the time travel theory is one of the is brought up by a professor named Mike Masters, who's got a couple of books out. He acknowledges it doesn't cover all of the phenomena, but he thinks they could be extra tempestrial, I believe is his term. That the extra. There's another view, by the way. David Grush, the military intelligence agent, who has said, "Look, he's been getting close to the secret. We have recovered craft, some of which apparently, if I recall his claim, are in very good shape. They were recovered intact." Well, wait a minute. How does that happen? Right. We've got some that apparently have crashed. That's according to some evidence, some claim. How would we have intact craft? Was there a trade? I mean, this is where it gets really
I've heard this theory. I was going to ask you about this. Eisenhower, people talk about this. Supposedly, he made a deal with the extraterrestrials that if we receive technology, they would allow abductions to happen, different experimentations, the different phenomena that we see, at least in North America. I don't know if the aliens know that. They're just supposed to stick to North America if they make a deal with Eisenhower, but still, supposedly this deal happened. And things like fiber optic technology and the integrated circuit and other forms of technology were supposedly fed to industry by General Corso, who wrote a book the day after Roswell, where he talks about all this. What do you think? I mean, do you believe that?
Well, here's what I think. There's a lot of talk about back engineering recovered craft. We've recovered craft. That is what is said. That is said to be the case. We've recovered, and now what we're doing in highly compartmentalized, highly siloed research with the aerodynamic corporations. Apparently, it's been offloaded to them. This is what is said. It's very clear to me that the way we're going to be truly back engineering the phenomenon is that. If you notice at the public levels, when there are discussions of congressional hearings, and apparently there are going to be a new round of congressional hearings, but at that level, it's always about recovered material. It's the material level that is the most plausible and considered the most credible. So one of the arguing points within the field of UFO research. I don't cover it in depth, but there's a big split between those researchers who are at major universities and dealing with physics and material science, and over there. And then over here are the witnesses, the human element, the abductees, those people who have had direct encounters. They're not invited to a lot of the same conferences. They're not invited to testify at Congress, for example. The hearing that was held this past spring with the, I'm not going to try to remember all of the three witnesses, but Grush was one of them. Ryan Graves was another one, and Frager, the pilot. Exactly. So the point, they were all talking about the Tic Tac. They were all talking about radar. They're all talking about physical evidence, which is the most credible place to start in a materialistic culture. Meanwhile, the inner, the Gnostic, the spiritual part is not going to go away. People are having reports. I don't expect them to be invited. Whitley Strieber is probably not going to be invited to talk about his experience from communion at a congressional hearing because it's just too weird. So there is a realm of the phenomenon that's close to materiality that we're more comfortable talking about. But that which goes further out into hardcore religious experience, the kind that Jeff Kripal at Rice University and that I focus on in my book, the Terence McKenna with inner space, psychedelics, shamanism. No, those frames of reference are not going to be not going to be part of congressional hearings. So there's going to be multiple arenas in which the unfoldment. People say, what about disclosure? I say the biggest disclosure is the events themselves.
Yes.
It's the disclosure is happening in our midst. Now, I know what people mean when they say disclosure. When is the government going to tell what it knows? I will tell you what I think. I believe there's a large part of what the government knows that consists of they don't know. Right. They are as bewildered and befuddled. I actually don't tend to line up with the idea that Eisenhower went to a military base and had interactions. It all is too science fiction-ish of the 1950s.
It does have that vibe, for sure.
So for my taste. So I could be wrong. Maybe there's a mundane quality to this that is just like that. But I think if we were to have an honest statement of a press secretary at the Pentagon and give that press secretary a slight bit of sodium pentothal, truth serum, before they went out, they would probably say something like this. I'm here today to announce that there are apparent craft phenomena crossing through our airspace with impunity. We don't know where they're from. We don't know what their intentions are. Their technological capacity far outstrips ours. We don't have any more to say. We'll keep you posted. Thank you. Good night. No. We're not going to have that kind of an acknowledgement of something that it would, I don't necessarily cite the mass terror response, but the ontological shock, that phrase is often used, ontological shock. Ontology refers to the nature of being. So we stand to be very shocked by understanding what the nature of this is, especially in the face of our religious beliefs, religious mythologies, which are still pretty terrestrial and they're still pretty tribal. So there's a sense in which I think one part of this whole phenomenon, Jake, is to get us to a post-tribal identity.
Yes, I talk about this as a galactic consciousness or even a universal consciousness. When you shift your awareness to, I'm from X city, from this state, from this country, I'm this gender, I'm this ancestry, you get past those identifications and you get back to the true identification is that we're all here as humans on Earth, and actually Earth is part of a solar system, which is part of a galaxy. And if you scale that up, you could say, well, it's actually part of a galactic supercluster, but let's not go there yet. Let's just scale it back and say we're part of a galaxy, and our consciousness, our awareness would shift in that way. And we would see the life out there and identify with it. And again, maybe connect with it on that light being basis. But there is stages of advancement. There is a process that we need to go through. And again, you're saying that this is the process of that. And I want to ask you about channelers. There's so many people, including guests that I've had on the show, that claim to channel extraterrestrial consciousnesses from various parts of the universe, different galaxies, other places, even other multidimensional galaxies other parallel universes. They're bringing these entities in. What do you think about that information?
Well, I would say the old adage, by their fruits ye shall know them. So let's just say what is being channeled. I think some of the best material channeled is through the phenomenon, the meta being known as Seth, S-E-T-H.
Very familiar.
Now, I'm not a close devotee of the Seth material, but regardless of what you believe about a particular channeling, what part of the universe it is said to come from, what comes through in the channeled material, how does it accord with the other sources we have from mythology, spirituality, other teachings of the ancient teaching? To what extent is it consistent with that? So it doesn't necessarily depend on whether it's from other physical places so much as what comes through. I consider the Seth material, which comes through, Jane Roberts was the channel for a long time. So the simple answer is, I believe channeled stuff should be paid attention to. It can also be, one of the things that the wise spiritual teachers regarding from theosophy and other esoteric traditions will say is the spirits are notorious tricksters. They will tell you all kinds of things. So the claim is that actual real beings in the other world are real, but they'll tell you things that are not true, which is a wonderful double whammy. They're real beings. It's real intelligence with real information. But, for example, the most recent prediction about the end of the world, they don't tend to turn out. We're still here.
Every time they put a number on it, it never works out.
It never works out. You can pretty much say, well, that's not going to probably work out again. So yeah, I don't believe everything that comes through. But I think psychic, a big part of my book is to argue that much of this phenomenon can be understood as capacities in our own human realm that we don't acknowledge. For example, look at let me just give you one, the placebo effect. Okay. Let's make this really grounded. It's an effect that the medical establishment concedes is real. How does placebo work? You have an experimental group and a control group. The test is a pain medication. Some of the members of the experiment will get a dummy pill, but we won't know which ones will get the dummy pill. Some will get the real pain medication. We don't, but nobody's going to know. It's double, right, triple blind. So the point is, you have people who take the dummy pill who not only experience the same benefits at a percentage of probability that is far beyond statistical, they also experience the side effects of the real drug that they did not have. This tells us the mind-body thing is this. It's not this. No. It's this. Mind and body are connected. They appear to be separate. At one level, we go through life acting as if we are separate beings. But the evidence that the deepest level, we are one. It's a cliche, but we are a one phenomenon. So yeah, the placebo effect is a very good one. And when you have doctors who go on television and say, well, that was just a placebo. Just the placebo. Just the placebo. Again, the people who got the dummy pill had recoveries at the same level. Exactly. And they also had the same side effects. How would they have the same time, except that they believe they got the real medicine?
Yes, that's
Why don't we find ways to marshal the placebo effect, teach children about their self-healing capacities so that next time aliens seem to levitate them from their room, maybe they'll consider the possibility that maybe the mind-body composite is not what we think it is. Maybe the saints in the Catholic religious tradition who reported levitation, we should look at those reports too. So, I think that we're living in a wild and woolly time. More is coming out onto the conversation than ever before from multiple realms. And let's be discerning, but open.
There's more coming out now than ever before. And with the internet and the speed of information, it's just kind of mind blowing how fast our awareness and our consciousness is evolving. And when you get to that guru level, you talk about the placebo effect, when a human can truly put their entire self in consciousness behind the matter, that's when consciousness can influence matter. And you hear about these gurus that can materialize food, and you think about Ram Dass's guru appearing in multiple places, and just so many different awesome stories that are out there. It's because these people are at that place. They're realizing that consciousness is, again, the foundation of everything. So when you can put your awareness there, then perhaps you can have influence on matter itself and have control of that. Now, I'm not saying I can do that. I don't know anybody personally that can, but it seems like that is possible when you develop yourself in that way. And do you think that there's a time coming as we get through our hero's journey, as we engage with this information, we integrate it, we evolve? Do you see a time where humanity is living side by side with material aliens, those that exist in the material form, highly advanced AI, all living together in a harmonious way? Do you see something like that happening? There's so much advancement going on right now.
Well, I was just reading today, I don't remember where it was. I think it was on UFO Twitter, which is now called UFO X. That is a wild and woolly conversation to watch, the UAP discussion at X. I got to remember that it's a particular sampling. Okay. But anyway, there are people who believe that that even among the aliens, the others, the non-human intelligence, there are many varieties. And allegedly, according to some, they don't all get along together themselves. There are different agendas. Now, I tend to be very cautious about that because the belief systems can run rampant.
Yes.
The overbelief is just something that William James, he had two basic ideas, the great American philosopher, psychologist. First is radical empiricism. You could take the empirical method. Anything that could be observed can be studied, and we can attempt to understand it better, including states of consciousness. We live in a cosmos of experience. There are many kinds of experience. Some experiences feel more like matter. Other experiences feel more like mind. So he said, as a radical empiricist, I say, let us study everything. Then the other element he added, let us watch out for overbelief. When we, in studying unusual phenomena and opening up to non-ordinary phenomena, when we believe more than the evidence should lead us to believe. So I have somehow those two running parallel. I'm open all the time to big claims, but I often say, I'm not from Missouri, but I say, show me. Right. What's your evidence? And I will say that not in a hostile way. I will say to someone, that's a remarkable claim. What's your evidence? And someone will say, Keith, that's a very antagonistic question. I said, it's not intended to be antagonistic. What's your evidence? How would I find out for myself? How could I verify that? My Lord, if someone told me, Keith, I'm not married. Someone said, Keith, your wife or your girlfriend is cheating on you. Am I going to say, well, I don't know that that's true. I don't have any reason to believe that. No, I'm probably going to say, well, what's your evidence?
Right.
I mean, if I care about the relationship. So I think we are evidence. Evidence matters. So yeah, I'm open to big claim, but I want to know the evidence. And I know there are a lot of claims that are being made right now. I think we're going to see a lot of new mythologies. It may well be, Jake, that the primary purpose of this phenomenon is to change our belief systems through symbolic interactions. It could be that a long-term transformation of our mythologies and our belief structures are the primary shift where this is happening. And that's hard to measure.
Right. But it's part of a bigger process, and there's some sort of awareness, some sort of consciousness that's guiding that development.
Oh, yeah. And listen, there are conferences happening right now at Stanford. Dr. Gary Nolan is playing a big role. He's studying what's called metamaterials, anomalous matter that is related to alleged craft, alleged aerial phenomena. He's also studying changes in the brains of persons who've had encounters, who've had contact with UFOs. So there is a lot. There's a lot on the table right now. Where the mainstream is beginning to open and let some of the guard down. So, and again, the very fact that UFOs have been rechristened as UAP is a sign. And out of 100 and was it 140 sightings, only one could be explained.
Right.
I mean, we now have officially unexplained aerial phenomena. And that's what, so people say, is the phenomenon real? UFOs are real by the admission of our government that cannot explain them. Now, the government does say if we had greater metrics, if we had greater systems of detection, we could probably explain most of it. But the point is, the observed behaviors of the tic-tac events. I'm not an expert on the tic-tacs, but I know about the velocity, the change of trajectory, the behaviors, the no apparent propulsion system, the interaction with water in ways that is truly anomalous, is stuff that we don't have answers for.
Right. I mean, clearly there's something going on there. Intuitively, it feels extraterrestrial. It feels like we're being prepped for this new type of consciousness, this new Earth. And again, tell me what you think about this, because we talked about so much, but I really believe, this is my own personal belief, I really believe that in order to get the type of technology that we're talking about, folding space-time, doing incredible things, essentially using consciousness, God, as your technology, that you have to be at a certain level of development, a high level of development. And when you reach that development, you're more love-based, you're a higher frequency being. And when people talk about different races, alien races with different agendas, it doesn't make sense to me, because to have that type of technology, you have to be there. And then the creator of the divine, whatever that is, the Akashic records open up and you get that technology. It seems like that's the only way that you could get that. What do you think about that?
So ask me that again. What do I think about what in particular?
That the only way to achieve the highest level of development that some of these alien civilizations may have achieved, that you would need to have the highest level of spiritual advancement, that you would need to be literally,
that would be, some of the abduction researchers would say there's not real good signs of spiritual advancement among the grays, the ones that are taking people out of bed, performing medical examinations, taking genetic material. I'm not saying this is happening. I'm saying people are shown, witnesses are shown scenarios like this. But in any case, the official elements of the abduction mythology often involve beings that appear to have very little emotional affect. They appear to be trying to understand our own emotionality. They appear to be very diminished beings if we take them at face value. I'm of the mind that a larger intelligence might be projecting these scenarios to encourage us to believe these are happening. That, for example, could the hybrid, the idea that there are human alien hybrids, okay, maybe there are. When I ask the researchers who claim that, they'll say things like, they are so highly evolved now, there's no way to tell the difference between them and us. I go, well, then there's no way to determine they're hybrids.
Right.
Is there? So there's like a lot of circular thinking. I sometimes will step back and I'll say, what is being communicated in the idea of hybrids symbolically? There may be a material basis for it genetically. Maybe we should run hybrids through 23andMe to see if there are genetic samples that really do appear anomalous. But short of that kind of evidence, what would we say symbolically is at work in the human alien hybrid idea? Could it be that it is a hybrid between our conventional self and a larger identity that is trying to be born? Is that the hybrid? Are we all hybrids to various degrees? Are we coming ashore to a larger identity?
Well, I think that's where we're at. And I think that's really, like you said, the crux of your whole book. And it's amazing. We've had such an incredible conversation. My God, we've really covered a lot of ground. We've talked about so much related to this because, again, you're challenging the status quo. You're challenging how people have viewed the UFO, UAP phenomenon and giving them a new lens to look at it through. And I believe a more correct lens. Now, like we both said during this episode, the jury's out. We're not here to give you definitive answers. But I think what Keith is asking, what I'm asking, is to just look, observe, read the book, and decide for yourself what this information does for you. And I think that could really help you. So, Keith, what an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's just terrific. Maybe we can schedule another time to go to the footnotes, go deeper, because this is really a positive, fertile conversation we've had.
Oh, it's been amazing. And yes, we're definitely going to have you back. And I want to tell people where to find you. Your website is Thompson at Large. That's THOMPSON, ThompsonAtLarge.com. The book we're talking about, The UFO Paradox, the celestial and symbolic world of unidentified aerial phenomenon. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere you can get books, you can get that. And before we go, Keith, is there anything else you would like to tell the world? You have a few seconds here. What message would you like to leave us with?
Well, two. One is practical. I'm also on Twitter, which is now called X, and I'm at Keith Thompson. Keith, all one word, Thompson, together, number 1. Keith Thompson 1. But beyond that, what I want to say, it's okay not to know. It took me this field is so highly organized around competing knowledge claims. And the debates, especially on X or Twitter, the debates among ufologists are enough to keep a smart alien from landing anytime soon. I would think that the others, whoever they are, probably come back from their field trips and report to Central Command. You won't believe what these people argue about. You won't believe they still don't have agreement about what the best diet is for a human being. I mean, you could go down the list of things that we you could argue that an advanced culture would say, they're not ready to meet us. They're still in kindergarten. In any case, what I say is it's okay not to know. It's okay not to have definite answers. Use questions to come up with better questions. Be comfortable sitting with questions. In Buddhism and other mystical traditions, there's language for don't know mind. It's okay to have don't know mind, because a don't know mind is open to new information. A mind, in fact, as Suzuki Roshi, the great Zen master of the West Coast, said, in the beginner's mind are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are a few. The expert doesn't have room for new information. The beginner does, because the beginner says, I don't know. I think I'll find out. That's the attitude I encourage people to hold toward this and to enjoy the adventure.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for that, Keith. That's a powerful message. And just remember that, again, we're one human family. We're on a path of development, and there's a lot of life out there that's ready to meet us when we get there. We just have to love each other again. We can do it. We can be in love with each other again. We're so cool. We're the humans. We can do it. So, thank you, Keith, so much. Please hold through the outro music. And everyone, check out the book, check out the websites, and we will see you next week, Midnight on Earth.